Disclaimer, my comments today are my own. I am not speaking as a representative for Holy Spirit Hospital, Penn State Health, or the Diocese of Harrisburg. And I will say that if I remember at the end. Okay, so I like small, intimate crowds. And the fact that it's being recorded is going to make me stay on script, because otherwise I'd be right next to you and making it more casual. But this way, at least you can use it later. And I never know what's going to come out of my mouth, even though it's on script. But I'm kind of shameless. So the two cards that you have, the Mother Pauline one, that's just because we had many of these made. And then the next thing you know, we weren't Geisinger anymore, and we weren't Holy Spirit by itself anymore. And now we're Penn State Health. So we've had to rebrand. Well, I've got thousands because they went in clinics. So I like to share. If you have any grandchildren, great-grandchildren want to be sisters, you just send them our way. See why Penn State doesn't want to take credit for my words. And on the back is really an explanation of my community. So, you know, whenever I give orientations, I say, I am so thankful to God I don't look like that today, because Germany is where we started, and it was bitter cold, right? They didn't have heat. They had cracks in the building, and snow came in. They needed to look like this. It was really the dress of the day. And then the veil was the added piece, right? So Mother Pauline had two brothers and a sister. That's what you're looking at here. And that white piece around her head, do you know what that's called? It's called a coif. Yeah, it's called a coif. And what shape is it in?
Heart.
A heart. Oh, you guys are good. I like participation. Yes, and so I like the story I'm going to tell you because number one, it is true. But number two, it just tells you about a few things about Mother Pauline. So I'll tell you the story first. When she came and stood in front of her two brothers and her sister, they said to her, "What's the name of the congregation?" And she said, "Well, the bishop gave us the name." This is in Paderborn, Germany. "The bishop gave us the name of Sisters of Christian Charity, Christ-like Love." So, as only a brother can do, and I got 6, he took the cane and he hit the center. And because it was starched, it dipped into a heart shape. So, I like it because of the playfulness of the family. I always say, don't put us sisters on pedestals, because we're going to only fall off. We're human like you. We make mistakes like you. We go to confession like you, right? So we're human. And I also like the story because, aside from the playfulness of the brother, Mother Pauline's humility, she left it like that. So when she looked at the sisters, she'd be mindful that the call to love is not just for her sisters, and they were 4 when they began, but for herself as well. And so tonight I'm hoping that even as we're talking about kind of a heavy topic, that we're really about spreading love, joy, peace, and healing in whatever we're doing. And so in our care of the sick, right, I think one of the wonderful things that we can do is to give them a little piece of spirituality. And so that's other card you have there, you are blessed. When I came to Holy Spirit, my first life, I was a teacher. I taught for 30 years. I ran a retreat center, and I was actually in South America because my community had asked me to put together a mission. 3 purposes: spiritual renewal, an experience of international community, all my sisters, right, from different countries, and service to the poor. And so I was doing that when I got the phone call, and it went something like this: "Sister, we're asking you to please," and this is vow of obedience, right? So there's only one answer. "We're asking you to please come to Holy Spirit and be the mission integration officer." I said, "Oh, sure." And then I made my first mistake. Maybe that was already my first mistake. But my second one was to ask, "And what is that?" Silence. I knew I was in trouble, right? But if we walk with God and we don't have answers, it's okay. And so tonight, I'm going to probably give you a very different talk than you're expecting, because I'm not going to sit here and tell you, okay, we're Catholic and end of life, this is what we do. And in this case, you do this, and in that case, you do that. Because I too had to learn healthcare. I had to learn the mission that I was doing, and how do I support, guide, and teach at end of life. And I say end of life because mostly that's what we're dealing with now, right? in the hospital. Well, to me, it's about our faith. So tonight I'm really taking you, hopefully, on a little bit of your own journey, looking in and saying, where am I? Because if you and I don't know what we feel about death, it's going to influence how we respond for ourselves, and if we're a proxy for someone else, and how we respond to the healthcare providers, nurses, doctors, and all others. And we want to put our best foot forward, right? Even as we're kind of concerned or not at our best or worried. So I titled this Coming from God and Returning Home, because this is not our eternity. And I think we all want to be there. It's that getting there that's the problem. I say, thank you, Adam and Eve. We'll just blame them all night. So, kind of a little reflective to set the tone for our topic about end-of-life issues by being mindful of our human dignity. So the dignity of every person, ours is inherent dignity of life, not dependent upon our doing, the capacity to do. Is my worth greater or less because now I only have one limb? Or maybe I'm hard of hearing, or I have dementia, or I'm colorblind. Do any of those so-called handicaps, do they lessen my dignity? And because we're people of faith, we know the answer is no. So keep that in mind when you're at end of life and you're not running the block anymore, right? That you're still a human being worthy of dignity and respect. John Paul II, St. John Paul, says human beings are willed by God. They are imprinted with God's image. Their dignity does not come from the work they do, but from the persons they are. And we know of Psalm 139, probably a favorite of many of you. God formed each of us and he knows us intimately. And I found this saying, it's anonymous, I don't know who said it, but I really like it. Every person deserves to be treated with dignity, no matter how poor or damaged the shell that carries it. We're not that body. That body gets tired, it gets, worn down. But the us, that's the soul. Let us pray in the words of Blessed Pauline von Mallinckrodt. My Lord God, even now, resignately and willingly, I accept from your hands whatever kind of death it may please you to be mine. And I always add, and for those I love. And I say that every single day when I'm at Mass, because at some point I'm going to experience death, and I don't know if it's going to be quick. I tell them, listen, God, you can do it in my sleep because I'm really not into pain, right? And Sister Maria can tell you that I'm telling the truth, because I've said to the sisters, if you open my bedroom door and find me on the floor, close it and come back in 2 hours, because I don't want to be hooked up to machines. Okay. So humor is important, but there's also some realities to that. What really am I saying there? So already as I begin this presentation, I need to say upfront that you may leave here with lingering questions about end of life. Be at peace. End of life issues are complicated, and when the time comes, professionals will guide and support you through the decision-making process. We just have to kind of get out of the way and listen open-mindedly to what they have to say. That being said, you are the best advocate for your own health care. If you're the designated medical power of attorney, POA, for someone, it's important that you know their end-of-life wishes and have periodic conversations with that person to be certain that their wishes have not changed. You're going to find out that I'm going to throw humor everywhere that I can because it's a heavy subject. But my dear Father, You know, even as I'm saying, have these conversations, have them periodic. He'd say, don't worry about end of life. Just put me in a garbage bag and put me out to the curb, right? Like, "Ugh." And he was really a man of deep faith. And what he was saying was, that's just my shell, right? I'm with God and don't keep me from getting there. But I can tell you in all honesty, I wanted a conversation so that when we got to the end, I'd know what he wanted. And God provided for us anyway. It's very important that you keep informed about current medical practices and laws. Know the Catholic Church's teaching on issues regarding healthcare at end stages of life. The ethical and religious directives for Catholic healthcare, which we know as the ERDs, is a good source and easily accessible on the internet. And so that paper you have there in blue, I gave you some websites, and that's one of them on there. Because in the world of technology, you have information at your fingertips. You just want to be sure that they're reliable sources. And I cannot possibly cover nearly enough information with you this evening regarding end-of-life issues. As I said earlier, they're complicated. And as I've learned from doing this ministry, cases are not black and white. Right? We look at ethics, we look at morality, what's right, what's wrong, what should I do, what shouldn't I do? Oh my goodness. You know, we need the medical profession there with us, and we need our spiritual leader, whoever that is, the pastor or another priest, right? Religious. So you're not going to walk away saying, at my end of life, I want this, right? We don't know where we're going to be at end of life. We don't know what suffering we may or may not have, what disease we may or may not have. So for this presentation, our end-of-life discussions refer to an elderly person, because we know God can call us home at any time. In the elder population, more times than not, the patient will have comorbidities, meaning that they're going to present with more than one significant health issue. And this makes healthcare decisions complicated and complex. Patients and or the proxy must seek information and medical advice from the experts. And that's the physicians, right? And at some point, palliative care physicians may be involved, right? When deciding how to proceed medically, they're the ones that are going to be in the room speaking to you. And also available are the spiritual leaders, the priests, the pastoral care team members, the ethicists, the me. Case managers, social workers, right? The palliative care health providers are going to be involved in your plan of care for an end-of-life patient, if it's you or someone you're the proxy for. During end-of-life cases, a team of professionals will discuss the patient's medical condition, whether it's you or someone else, and best possible next steps in the care of the patient. Now, they're going to consider benefit versus burden, but the patient knows best what is a benefit, what is a burden. I have a really high pain tolerance, okay? Someone may have a very low pain tolerance, but I also know if I get diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, I'm not going through anything, right? I'm running around visiting my family and saying my goodbyes and getting everything in order, right? Tearing up all my personal things I don't want people reading when I'm gone. But they're going to think about that benefit and burden, but you're going to be the one saying which those are. Be assured that when any member of the care team speaks with you about end of life, you are able to ask questions. Even when I'm riding on the elevator, I say, I hope you had a good visit. Please know you can ask questions. Right? Sometimes we have to have that, someone say that to us, but you have that right. And it's best if you do. Now, once you are fully informed and feel confident that your questions have been addressed and sufficiently answered, you'll be prepared to make an informed decision regarding your healthcare treatment and plan. You as the patient have the right to decide your medical plan of action. A Catholic hospital is going to honor your decision if it does not go against the ethical and religious directives for Catholic healthcare. It will never be our intent to cause death of the patient or to take any medical action with the intent to hasten death. We don't have physician-assisted suicide. Okay, that's murder. There comes a point when the end stage of life is comfort care rather than to cure, because cure is no longer an attainable or realistic goal. This is a difficult crossroads for the healthcare providers because they may face that they cannot always cure a patient under their care. And we know it's difficult for us, the listener. Right? It may likewise be difficult for the patient or the healthcare power of attorney, which we call the proxy or the POA, to accept that medicine has done all that it can do. And by continuing to do everything medically possible, we can be doing more harm than good. We are, in effect, denying the patient the natural dying process. And that puts doctors and nurses and people like me and others that walk in the room in moral distress because we're causing undue suffering to the patient. And we do have those cases where the person is actively dying, but the family's not there. Be very careful of the words, do everything possible. You don't mean that when God's calling you home and preparing you and you're actively dying. But if you say those words, your loved ones who are desperate to keep you here for forever, hold you to it. And that's where the struggle comes. Tonight, I really want to talk to you from the heart, from personal experiences of death and dying, and of hospital encounters with family members of dying patients. My intent really is to be practical and to cause you to think of, think about, and prepare for end-of-life decisions for yourself or for a loved one. Because really, death ain't a warm fuzzy. End-of-life experiences can come out of nowhere and be totally unexpected. Are you ready? I know I wasn't. I was living out of the country. I was in the Philippines, actually, so I was half a world away, 12-hour difference, right? Sometimes 13. When I picked up the phone in the middle of the night, it was actually 3:15 in the morning, to be exact. It's a lot of years ago. And I heard my baby brother say to me, Aunt Mary is at end-stage lung cancer. Michael, my 7-year-old nephew, might have bone cancer. He wasn't done. My brother-in-law was quickly losing his battle with cancer of the jaw. He was just 35 years old. He wasn't done. My dad was fighting for his life due to heart complications. And to my brother? Well, a few hours before that phone call, he died from a massive heart attack. We were only 11 months apart. How? How could it be possible? You can be sure God and I had a chat. He did a lot of listening. End-of-life experiences can be totally unexpected and devastating. They ain't warm fuzzies. A few months after the phone call, my younger sister was diagnosed with a brain tumor. Are you ready? I know I wasn't. We all have our stories and our experiences with death. Death happens. It isn't optional. Your stories, your experiences are real and they hurt. You grieve. And by the way, you grieve for a lifetime. Get prepared. We are all human. Those whom we love are human. And this means time on this earth is not our eternal life. An ethicist friend of mine has humor, and he's Irish and German, as am I. We're both Americans. He left out the French-Canadian part, so I wanted to ask him about that. But he says, this is the definition. For the Irish, death is going to happen, and it's going to happen at the worst possible time. The Germans, Death will happen. Learn to live with it. And the Americans, death is optional. Medicine's going to cure everyone and everything. What do you believe about death? It matters. It will dictate how you react and respond to end-of-life issues and conversations with the physicians and healthcare providers. There are some things each of us can do in preparation for end of life. And we owe it to ourselves and to those with whom we will journey through the dying process to be prepared. But are we really ever fully prepared? Sure, we know that answer, right? Prepare yourself spiritually. How? Now already trust in God. Entrust your life over to the care of God. Hope in eternity. And if you're at end of life with someone, for them you're hoping in eternity even as you hope for a miracle. And recognize that even in death, a miracle happens. God and all of heaven prepares you and your loved ones for the journey into eternity. God's loving embrace. I can tell you, when my dad died, I felt heaven in that room. Right? Even as you prepare spiritually already now, what else ought you to do? Talk. Talk about your wishes for end-of-life care. Choose a medical proxy, preferably one person, who will make medical decisions for you if you're unable to do so yourself. The reason I say one, I've seen what happens when there's two. And I don't have to say it, do I? One's here and one's there, and we're scratching our heads in the center saying, oh Lord, now what? I mean, how do we move this patient along? Because they're at odds. But only choose a person after speaking with him or her in length, in detail, about your end-of-life medical wishes. Don't force one to assume this responsibility, because I've seen that too. Make sure the person knows and accepts the obligation. It is an obligation. It's an honor, a sacred honor. It's an obligation to speak on your behalf in your best medical interests, honoring your wishes. Kids can be the worst. You want to hang on to mom and dad. Right? I already lost my dad, but my mom, it's dementia. And as I prepare for these talks, as I walk families through, I am going to be as bad as the worst family I've encountered. Because, thank you, Adam and Eve. We don't want to go through the process. We want the end result of heaven for our loved one, but we don't want to go through the process. We don't want to get to the no mores. Right? We're human. So you need to be aware of the documents available, and that's part of tonight, to talk to you about those. But I really want to backtrack you and say, you're not going to know all the choices you should be making because you're not there, whether it's for you or someone else. But get ready now, deepen your faith, ask yourself the questions. I tell God, I'm ready now. You can have any time you want, because I want to know what I'm saying and doing when I'm older. But then I'm in the car and someone cuts me off and, oh my God, I'm almost dead. And that prayer went out the window, I can tell you that. Right? So, we don't really mean it. We want to get there, but not quite yet, Lord. So there are advanced healthcare directives, and I think one of the other of you might have a copy of it, but our Catholic bishops of Pennsylvania put together, and it comes in different forms. You would have the paper version. I have a book, and they had put this out once upon a time, and it's really good. This was actually put out in 2007, so it's quite old, but the document still rings true, and I have mine with me. I use it. My community makes sure that we each have one, and in the convents where we are living, it's on file. so that if anything happens to us, they pull our file out and here it is, right? And since we're on it now, I might as well tell you that me being me, no document's good enough. So in the back part, it says further comments. And I wrote what I wanted to say, and I am going to share that with you tonight, but know that I can change that because I do revisit this, and the more I learn and the more I experience, the more I say, maybe that's not good enough, right? But I wrote this: make medical decisions that respect the dignity of human life, do not hasten my death, and do not prolong my life when burdens outweigh medical benefits. When medicine has done all it can do for me, provide comfort care. Thank you. And I said thank you. So they feel guilty if they ignored it. You know, it's a hard topic, but it's a really important one. And your kids need it. You know, if it's children that are going to be speaking for you in case you can't. Be as clear as you can, because my dad's answer wasn't too helpful. I mean, God was really good to me and helped me out and my siblings, but there's 11 of us and my brother that's with God. So imagine, I'm telling you about one proxy. We have 10 living, right? And we were 10 when my dad passed away, right? And everybody had their ideas, and I stayed away from all of them. Yeah, so really, it can be hard, but throw humor in there. You know, go have some ice cream afterward or something. But it is important. So the Pennsylvania Catholic bishops have given us this, and it's really given us ethical guidance, religious guidance as well. It's not intended to take the place of specific legal advice, because you're going to want that too. And you should periodically, in 3 to 5 years, review the living will and healthcare power of attorney with those people that are going to speak on your behalf if you can't. And you can revoke that directive anytime in any manner. You know, I could rip that up. But you got to make sure that if you write a new one, everybody that you distributed it to before gets the new copy. And as soon as you revoke it and have a new one, then it goes into effect. So we have a patient right now, 3 different living wills, right? So we got to go with the most recent one, okay? So thank heavens the more recent one appeared, right? Because we wouldn't have been following their wishes because the wishes changed. So make sure that if you do change it, that everyone knows it. So that would be the doctor, certainly the persons that you've appointed to be your proxy. I have 2. I suppose you can have more. I stay away from family. Trust me. 2 witnesses who are at least 18 years of age are required by Pennsylvania law, so you got to keep up on the law because it changes. If someone signs this form on your behalf, that person may not also be a witness, and this is law. And someone who will inherit property from you is a creditor of yours or is an employee of your healthcare provider should not sign as a witness. Now there's this thing that's been out tons of years. It's called PULSE, Physician's Orders. Physician's Orders. You can hear something in that. For life-sustaining treatment, and is meant for seriously ill or frail. So someone went into the doctor and he handed her a pulse and said, I need you to fill this out, and you can give it back to me on your next visit. She looked at him. She said, Doctor, when am I dying? How long do I have? She had humor. He went, huh? She said, do you know what a pulse is? He said, no, actually. He said, but, you know, it was suggested I give these out. And I think they were getting a kickback in financial. And so they're handing out these pulse. So he actually gave this to the wrong person. So there was a long lecture that followed with all the details of pulse. Right? Because she lobbied with legislators and we're telling them what we would like changed. They talk about dying within a year, and we would love for it to say within 6 months, right? Because it's physician's orders, it's a legal document. So something could happen and I'm not breathing, and if you resuscitate me, I'm going on to live a beautiful life. But I fill that out and I say DNR because I'm thinking it's going to be when I'm dying, and guess what? I'm at the pearly gates of the door, right? So don't fill out a pulse unless you know you're terminal. Okay, so if you don't remember anything tonight, remember that. Should never be signed without the patient having gone through really a thorough discussion with his or her healthcare provider. It is a legal document that goes into effect immediately on the person signing it. And that could be problematic, and I just gave you an example. So a person who signed a DNR, do not resuscitate, may present in a hospital with a condition that is not futile. And therefore, if resuscitated, the person could recover fully. And that's why tonight I'm not saying to you, do this, do that. You can't. I don't know anybody's medical story when it becomes time to really make these decisions. That spiritual preparation is so important. That's why I like talking to faith-based people. Spirituality is important for those who are dying and for the caregivers. And spirituality may take the form of organized religion and prayer, meditation, communing with nature. Some people tell me they like to walk, or even listening to music that is meaningful for you. There's all kinds of ways to get in touch with your spirit, your soul. Studies have shown that people who are dying experience a better quality of life in the last days if they have an active spiritual life. Even if you're yelling at God, he's a good boy, he can handle it. It's okay. He knows what we're thinking anyway. We know too that the spiritual life has benefits for more than the dying person. Caregivers of people with advanced illnesses are less likely to experience depression if their dying loved one had an active spiritual life. Now, when I first wrote this, my sister was taking care of my mom. We're now taking turns. I go home every other weekend to care for her, who has dementia. And it would kind of bring me to tears when I saw the tenderness of my sister as she would put the television on or whatever she was putting on so my mom could go to Mass because you couldn't take her to Mass. And my sister would poke her if she didn't concentrate, of course, right? But that prayer time, and my sister making sure my mother folded her hands and prayed her prayers before meals and after meals and at nighttime, my sister did for my mom what my mom did for us when we were growing up, to keep that spirituality alive. And she doesn't remember 5 minutes after, but for that moment, she sure does, right? And God knows what we're doing. And the person's in there, they just can't communicate as they had. And so I see the gift that it was for my sister as it was re-energizing her and helping her to keep her focus and to remember it's not mom's fault, right? It's a disease that's taking her away from us a little at a time. Spend time together whenever the person is, wherever they are, if they're home, in a nursing home, in a hospital, whoever it is that your loved one that's dying, your good friend that's dying, spend time with them. And we often hear people talk about how difficult, and I think when they say that, they mean emotionally difficult it is to spend time with their loved one who is dying. They don't want to remember their loved one the way they are at this stage, but instead they want to remember how they were before they were dying. And I assure you, spending time is important, not only for the person dying, but for you, the one who's close to them. Avoiding visiting with a dying family member or friend can sometimes lead to regret later. That being said, don't force anybody. People have to make their own decisions, and you need to be at peace with that. Kind of like I remember my mom saying, mind your own business, right? We can suggest, but you need to find a way to be at peace. I remember when my grandmother was dying. My father was begging, he was the oldest of the four, he was begging his siblings to get there. One never made it, right? She couldn't, but she suffered. But he had to stay at peace because he shared as best he could. But that was their relationship. And we have to trust that God gives the grace to each of us in God's time. So he certainly was with my aunt as she grieved and maybe had her regrets. And think of meaningful ways to spend time together. Reminisce, laugh, bring out the photo albums. You know, the laughters and tears of reminiscing can be very cleansing. Everyone is different when it comes to what is meaningful. And it's not the activities that you choose that are important. It's spending time, even if that time is in silence. Don't be afraid of the silence. Finally, don't worry that if you visit, you may break down and make your loved one's grief more difficult. Most often, your loved one would prefer your visit, even if you totally lose it. That might even be a source of laughter. You know, as my mother tells me, you're such a big baby. You know, and we laugh. Tears are okay. Be there. If your loved one wishes to talk about his or her death, don't worry about what you will say. Be in the present moment and take your loved one's lead. Remember to breathe. So I'm on the phone with my mom before she's in the stage that she's in now. And so I'm taking my advice and I'm talking to Mom about dying. And I said, I don't know about you, Mom, but I told God I'm ready anytime. And she says, well, I'm going first. I said, oh, great. I said, can I hold your hand? Dementia patient. Can I hold your hand? She says, no. Everybody has to do that all by themselves. And I'm like, oh, you know, oh, I'll remember that, you know. And for that moment, we had this beautiful conversation about why I had to go in there on my own. But the mother came out also because she assured me that when she got up there, she'd be praying to get me up there. Right? I thought, oh, you know, but nope, you got to do it by yourself. Nobody does that together with anybody, so she's not going to hold my hand. Thanks, Mom. You know, later in the conversation, I tried to go back into it. There was no memory. So catch the moments when they're there and don't be afraid of them. It's okay to cry. Thank. A dying person has the need to thank others for kindnesses received and to hear the gratitude expressed to him or her in return. The person is looking for closure to all business. The most important is putting relationships right. Allow for this opportunity. It will minimize regrets later. My dad was supposed to have surgery. Well, let's put it this way. It was an option, and he chose not to have it, but he was having some guilt about it. I said, Dad, you've lived a full life. You were a good provider for 11 kids, your wife. You've given us deep faith. You've set the example. We're all adults. We made mistakes before. We make mistakes now. We're going to make mistakes in the future. But God has us. It's okay. We're going to be all right. You can go. Man, did I see my dad change. The shoulders went down. He started eating all the foods he wasn't eating before. You know, it's like it gave him permission. And then I said to my siblings, we're not going to have Dad past the summer. So I'd strongly suggest you get here to see him. Some did, some did not. We buried him August 30th. Right? So we had the summer. You know, I just knew. Because even though I didn't have long conversations, that told me what he wanted at the end. He had made his mind up. He was going to God. So offer forgiveness. Forgiveness is healing. The person dying needs to hear loved ones assure him or her that they're forgiven their past hurts. The focus ought to be on meeting the needs of the person preparing to meet God. It's not time for us to stand there telling them all the things they did wrong. Oh my goodness, right? No. It's not revenge time. So there was a woman, she and her husband were separated, not legally divorced. She was still the POA. They never changed the document. She never came around when we had visiting hours. She made sure to come at nighttime when nobody was around. She could sneak around because we had 24/7. We have no idea what she said behind closed doors with him. But her comments to us was, healthcare providers, I want everything done for him. Everything possible done. I want him to suffer because he made my life a hell. That man suffered. So did our doctors and nurses and all of us. And we were going to court to get her rights taken away so that we could take care of him. He died the next day. But he suffered for a very long time. We can see the best or the worst of people at the end of life. Emotions amok. The time before the death of a loved one is filled with emotions, disagreements, anger, and resentment among family members can be strong. Keep it out of the patient's room. If you need to resolve differences, take it elsewhere. The dying person deserves a peaceful environment and not to be left with worry that those he or she cares most for are at odds with one another. The patient is preparing to surrender his or her life over to a creator, a loving, forgiving God. Family feuds are a contradiction of a loving, merciful God. Don't leave your loved one with the question of God's forgiveness because you are modeling its lack. We had to get security recently to take a family out of the patient room. And don't let family grievances rob you of the opportunity to feel the presence of heaven in the room. If you have the grace of being in the presence of someone actively preparing to meet God, it is a sacred time. Treasure it. Don't insert yourself into the scene. What do I mean? There comes a time for family to be the silent presence, allowing for the action of the Trinity and all of heaven interceding for a happy death for your loved one. So there's silence and there's silent prayer. There was a physician in our hospital, his father was dying, and I had the great privilege of loving his dad and being able to be there with him. And I had a meeting the day his dad actually died, so I ran up to the floor where his dad was and into the room. Now, any other time that I had gone into that room, his son the doctor, and you're not a doctor when it's your father, you're the son, was so loving, touching his father, talking soft to him, wiping his father's forehead. And this day I walked in, and he was at the back, sitting at the foot of the bed in the chair. There was no need for discussion. I knew where we were at. And I felt, right? In that moment, I knew I had to let go. So I nodded to him. I stepped close to the bed, and I offered silent prayer. I nodded again, touched his shoulder, and left. About 45 minutes later, we got the phone call. His father passed. All right? What a beautiful, beautiful, sacred time that he had. As God calls us home, he pulls us away from all of this. And we don't want to get in the way. A good first step is forgiveness. Forgiveness is really that listening piece. And so often people are ultimately saying the same thing, just in different ways. And sometimes there are clear differences. And a question you can ask yourself if you're irritated with another family, is it more important to love or to be right? Is it more important to love or to be right? And give your loved one permission to die. It's not uncommon for someone to hang on until some specific time, such as a wedding, a graduation, a birthday, a visit from a loved one. I think my dad wanted all of his children there, right? And I think even though he was gone to us, was he really, right? The hearing's the last to go. So what was God allowing him to feel or experience, even if he couldn't communicate it to us? For some people, it appears as if they finally allow themselves to take their last breath after a loved one says goodbye in some way, and in doing so grants permission. So there was a beautiful woman. She was, in her youth, she was a French teacher, and she had retired, but I knew she needed something. And so I invited her to speak to my students. At the time, I was teaching 5th grade. And I said, would you like to come to teach my kids French? She goes, oh, yeah. So once a week, she'd come and she'd give them the French lesson, and then they'd forget, right? And she'd come back and she gave her purpose, right? Well, it was now time for her to go to God. So she's in the hospital, and I'm visiting every day. Sometimes it meant walking a good mile. Sometimes I had the car. And this one day I went, it was a Wednesday night, and I went, and I knew she was saying goodbye to me. And I was trying to turn a deaf ear. I didn't want to hear it. Like, I was not ready to let her go. And her husband's there, and he knew, because I felt so close to her, because she loved my students, and that meant I loved her, right? And so anyway, she basically was saying to me, no, this is goodbye. You're not going to see me again. And so I hugged her, and there was she didn't say those words to me, but she was saying goodbye to me by what she was saying to me. And so I left. I played guitar. So the next day I had my students afterward. It was Thursday afternoon, and we're getting ready for Friday Mass, right? And I was recording for her. I was recording for her songs so that when I walked to the hospital that day, I could give it to her so she could hear the kids. Allow God to enter your life and don't second guess. So in the middle of the song that we're recording, I stopped playing. And I said, boys and girls, we have to pray for Miss Shashir. She just died. I thought nothing of it. They thought nothing of it. It just happened. I am positive that was her who came to visit us to say her goodbye to those students she loved. Of course, I hit the off button, so there's proof of it, right? I'm like, oh my heavens. And so I go back, to the convent and walk there. And as I'm opening the door, the phone is ringing. And it was the sister chaplain in that hospital. And she said, Sister Mary Joseph. And she tells me that June had died and that her husband wanted me to know. And I said, do you know the time? And she said, yes. And I told her, I said, was it? Now, right now, I really don't remember the time, but I gave her the time. And she said that was the exact time. Right? Heaven and earth are connected. We are connected. And if you live a life of faith, you will know that connection in one way or the other. Right? Somehow, we get those signs. Don't poo-poo them away. You're not crazy. That's God loving us. Right? That's God loving us. Permission to die can go both ways. Someone shared with me, the night my grandfather died, this is not my words, this is what she shared, so quote, the night my grandfather died, he said to me, we'll miss each other. His words gave me permission to let him go. And in turn, my response indicating that I would be okay gave him permission to pass on to the next place. I made her repeat that so I would have it for my talk, right? It touched her so deeply that she had to share it. The gift of goodbye can be a beautiful gift. I have no idea why I do this, but I find myself singing, right? And the room clears out. So I haven't evaluated that, but we know the song, God is so good. Do we know that God is so good? God is so good. God is so good. Oh, so good to us. Yes? A while ago, right? Well, I've done that a few times. Different patients of Catholic faith, of Baptist faith. It doesn't matter. It just comes out. Isn't that a beautiful thing to have pop into your mind as you're preparing someone, as you're walking the journey with them, right? So don't hesitate. And if you're really focused on that person, I never know that people leave or come in. I have no idea. I'm oblivious, right? Only later when they tease me do I know what happened, right? And my dad, the very man that wanted to be put in the bag and put at the curb, right? When his time came, he was scared. And I saw his body changing. And for some reason, it was my voice that he recognized and responded to. And so when I saw him tense, I found myself saying, "Most Sacred Heart of Jesus, I trust in you. Most Sacred Heart of Jesus, I trust in you," over and over. And I'm telling you, if I paused, tensed, "Most Sacred Heart of Jesus, I trust in you." So then I decided I had to, add a little onto it. "My Jesus, mercy, sweet heart of Mary, be my salvation." Got Mary involved, right? Go ahead, out loud, because they're people of prayer. Our generation prays, right? We're people of prayer. So do that for them, do that with them. And then there's grief. During and after the death of a loved one, expect to grieve. So what is grief? Grief is a perfectly natural and normal response to painful events, and it can have quite a dramatic impact. By way of example, a friend of mine, she is 11 years younger than I. She turned completely gray-haired within a few weeks after her mother's death. And that's not typical, but boy, was I stunned when I saw her. Grief is the powerful, multifaceted, and often uncontrollable response that human beings experience during and following a painful or traumatic event. And supporting someone through the dying process is a trigger for grief. The sudden death of a loved one is a trigger for grief. And grief is not a single emotion. It's an experience or state of being that manifests itself physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, following a painful or traumatic event. Remember, we're human. It's all we're ever going to be. So all of those emotions, our dearest God gave them to us, and he gave them to us for a reason, and they're going to hit us. Allow yourself to feel and grieve. So here's some common signs that you're grieving. Crying. It can come out of nowhere. Something triggers it unexpectedly. Sight, a smell, a sound, a person. I was in the airport and I was looking for someone, waiting for someone, and I was positive that was my brother. And there was only one problem, my brother just died. Right? I did. So we know, but we know on levels, and then we forget. Right? Oh, she's not my brother. Right? You're not crazy. It's normal. It's the body protecting itself until it can unfold a little more the reality. Sleep patterns change. You can have difficulty falling asleep, or you sleep too little or too much. There's an overall lack of energy. Feeling like you're going through the motions of life, but you're not connected to it. Feeling lethargic or apathetic about the day's necessary tasks or life in general. Changes in appetite. Not feeling like eating or consuming too much, particularly junk food. Be careful of sugar because it can bring your mood down, make you feel depressed or tired. Withdrawing from normal, usual social interactions and relationships. These are all normal. Difficulty concentrating or focusing at work, personally. The hobby, the listening to someone, you just can't even be in conversation. Questioning spiritual or religious beliefs. Right? Job, career choices, life goals. That's not the time to make major decisions about those. Right? We're grieving. There's feelings of anger or guilt or loneliness or depression or emptiness, sadness, all of the feelings. You put a name out there, it can all be your experience. And still occasionally experiencing joy and happiness. We really can experience joy and happiness, even in the midst of our sadness. Right? And people say things like, oh, they're not suffering anymore. You want to round up, right? And don't tell me about that. I know they're not suffering, but I miss them, right? Don't rob me of that opportunity to grieve through and grow through that loss. So change it up for a moment. Heavy stuff, right? The ERDs, Ethical and Religious Directives for Catholic Healthcare. At this point, it's in the 6th edition. I have mine all marked up because I teach from it. I refer to it constantly. This is what it looks like when you purchase it, but you can get it online. ERDs, because it's a lot of words to remember, Ethical and Religious Directives for Catholic Healthcare, but I'm sure that on that blue paper, I did put the web address there for you. And if you put ERD, and it's last I looked, it was about 7th down on the list because those letters are used for so many different things. But this is what we use in Catholic healthcare. It's the directives. It's beautiful. It's not do's and don'ts. In the 6th edition, we now have 77 directives. In the 5th, we had 72. Oh my goodness, I have to memorize a few more. But the whole last section was really on hospitals joining with non-Catholic hospitals and how to do that. And we have the bishop's approval when we do things like that. But they come in parts, and the 5th part is called Issues in Care for the Seriously Ill and Dying. And it's really beautiful. And no matter how long I'm in this ministry, I keep this on my desk and I have it all marked up and I read it frequently. So I would strongly suggest that you go through this for yourself and have conversations with each other, have conversations with the priests, ask the questions, because there's no way I can cover everything tonight. And yes.
Getting back to the very beginning of your presentation, in the Catholic hospital, does that directive have to be on file to remove somebody from a respirator by the patient, or can the next of kin give that approval?
So if they're
getting back to what you started
right.
Originally.
Right. So if you have your directive, your whichever one you're going to use, it can be this one here. Pennsylvania has an advanced directive that looks like this. There's lots of different forms, but whatever advanced directive you have, if you get it on the file, your doctor would have it, leave it with your spouse. So if you end up in the hospital, it's on file, and they take it and I'm trying not to move because it's terrible.
So many times you get a call, you have to show up at the hospital and the person's on the respirator. You're not going to get an answer from
right, and that's why you have to.
You can't get any kind of directive then.
Right.
And then come to the next of kin and you have to make a decision.
Right, and so that's why this is a really important document, right?
So if that's on file.
Right, if you have it, if you give it to your doctor or whoever, when they come to the hospital, they can hand that over. My sister, this is a little different story, but not really. He was all prepared, her husband. He knew he had a bad heart. He wasn't so upfront with her about that. How bad it was. He didn't quite report out. And the doctors can't tell you, right? HIPAA. And so she didn't know how bad. He had a heart attack basically in her arms, right in her house, and she was there. Now, he had lectured her 1,000 times over, do not resuscitate me, do not resuscitate me, do not resuscitate me. He knew that he wasn't going to make it if he was resuscitated. She didn't have that piece of information. And she was also in shock. When the EMS comes, if they don't have something saying do not resuscitate, they legally have to resuscitate. My brother-in-law, they attempted 5 times. So in the ambulance, on the way to the hospital, in the hospital, until finally they called it. I said, Jean, if you have nightmares, it's your husband haunting you, right? So tell as many people as possible what you want. And he had the document right at the door. All she had to do was reach and pick it, but she was in shock. She was in absolute shock. She couldn't think, right? So yes, get it in the hospital, via somebody or just by your doctor, you know, whoever your primary care doctor is, so that they will have it. Because today we can work with electronic records. So your records are electronically kept. And so they should be able to have that.
I think a public hospital will, you know, non-capital.
They should all have it. If you produce it,
They take the next of kin approval if the person should be removed.
right, so there's a legal order, and I don't have Pennsylvania memorized, I'm from Jersey. There is a legal order of who's first and second and third if there is nothing, and they have to legally follow that. Yeah, that's a really good question. They do have to legally follow whatever that order is. And I'm not sure what it is. Shame on me.
Could we go back to your scenario about the cardiac arrest?
Mhm.
If someone has a brace that says they do not resuscitate brace, and an EMT individual arrives, then will they not do?
I think if you have that, you're okay.
You're okay?
I think so. Check those questions out.
Would there be a situation if the wife is standing there and says, you know, do whatever you can, I want him to live?
And this is the problem. And again, you know, that's why I say keep up with the medical, but also keep up with the legal. You know, where is it? Because I honestly don't know all the ins and outs of all that. What I do end up knowing is when the cases happen, and then someone shares them with me, I go, ooh, never would have thought of that. You know, another scenario. Here's another example, my uncle. So this is Jersey. So he knew that the EMS, when they came, they were going to resuscitate. He knew he was having a heart attack. When he called his daughter to come and he said, I'm in some serious trouble, you know, I think I'm gonna need to go to the hospital. She came, and then clever little him told her she wasn't to ride in the ambulance with him. The house was a mess. She should clean that up. I think he got sick, right? And so she was doing that. And what did he do? He said to them, look, I've lived a good life. I've already had open heart surgery. I know I'm having a heart attack now. Do not resuscitate me. I have no regrets. He died. He said all of that in the ambulance and then died. They were so impressed with his resignation and clearly told him everything that they came to the funeral parlor to tell us the story, to assure us that he had a peaceful death and that he died the way he wanted to die. Because what do you think his daughter was saying? If I was in there with him, right? And that's exactly what he didn't want. But we don't all get that chance. My poor brother-in-law counted on my sister, he told 1,000 times. So, you know, in the end, God takes care of us. But yeah, and we have a problem probably in all of our hospitals where it's everybody's job and it's nobody's job, because that's what happens. So registration, do you have an advance directive, right? Do you live in will? Do you have a healthcare power of attorney, right? We ask the questions, but if the answer is no, who follows up? Or the family member says, yeah, but it's at home. Okay, bring it in the next time you come, or we really need that. And then they don't, right? And so it does become a major issue because it can be written, but it's no good to us if we don't have it in the records. So I do say get it with the doctor and, you know, make sure he has a copy because he can take care of that electronically. You can put that right in there. And then that's what we do in the hospital. You know, when we get that document, then it gets scanned in and it's electronically right there. We see the scan of that document in the electronic record. But it's becoming a real issue. And if you have more than one, I'd advise you rip up the old because that is a whole nother issue. We grab whatever and it may not be the most recent. And they say, you know, from the time you're 60. So I'm well into my 60s, right? So keep renewing. My health is good now, but who knows what it'll be when I'm 70 or 73 or 75, right? And so I think it's a really good idea to remind us to renew it, update it, or look at it and maybe nothing changes. But we need to look at it. So the ethical and religious directives really are good guides for us. But again, I'm not going to stand here tonight and say you must do this and you must do that because it's too complicated. It's too complicated. And we have cases where, a doctor will finally call me, and then I listen, and I'm not a doctor, right? I'm not a nurse. So I ask questions. So all I can do when an ethics consult is called is be advisory. But in the end, the doctor makes the decision, right? For the patient who can't speak for themselves, right? Or the family that is feuding and they're all over the place. And all we can do is say, here's 3 options, or here's 2. And if you choose this one, this will be the consequences that that person has to live with. And if you choose this one, this is what it means medically. This will be the consequences that the patient has to live with. Or if you choose this one, here's what this means medically, and there are consequences, and that patient has to live with it. So whoever you choose to speak for you, it's about what you want, not about their feelings of not being able to let you go. And then therefore, they're not making decisions based on what you want, right? And again, we don't know everything. If you heard what I wrote, I wasn't specific. I said, don't kill me ahead of time, right? Don't hasten my death, right? But don't be hooking me up to a bunch of machines. If I'm going to God, it's my time. Don't extend my dying process, right? Don't get in the way of that. Now, we know that even if we make decisions that aren't in the best interest of the patient, God has us, right? And we go when he's ready for us, when he calls us, right? So be at peace that way too. That in the end, we're his. We don't get there a minute before he wants us, and we don't get there a minute after. We get there when he wants us. He writes straight with crooked lines. My mom has gone down with dementia, and my poor sister-in-law is already on a guilt trip. What did we do wrong? Is it our fault? Like, how'd you get sick? I didn't know we brought germs in the house, but you got a cold, and relax. It's not your fault. It's what the disease does. It progresses, right? And so you got to find a way to not drive yourself nuts. So part 5, there are values. And one of them is stewardship over human life. And so the theological piece to that would be, we are not the owners of our lives, and hence do not have absolute power over them. We have a duty to preserve life. So, is assisted suicide okay? No, right? It's not ethically or morally okay, right? That's that hastening of death. We're not the authors of our life. It came from God. And God takes us when God says that whatever we were doing here, it's over. We've done it. Come home. Okay? The Catholic Catechism, talking about euthanasia and assisted suicide, and then talking in that idea, comes out with something I want to share with you. It's 2278. Discontinuing medical procedures that are burdensome, dangerous, extraordinary, or disproportionate to the expected outcome can be legitimate. It is the refusal of overzealous treatment. Remember when earlier I said, be careful, don't make that statement, do everything possible? You might not mean that. Here, one does not will to cause death. One's inability to impede it is merely accepted. The decision should be made by the patient if he or she is competent and able, or if not, by those legally entitled to act for the patient, whose reasonable will and legitimate interests must always be respected. One of the things that we get into trouble with, it's so complicated, is that nutrition and hydration. When you're sick, right, do you keep eating like you always eat? Do you drink like you always drink? There comes to be a point when our body cannot assimilate that food and drink. And so we are doing more harm than good. So I'll tell on one of our sisters. I was not happy. We were taking turns because sister was actively dying, and we were waiting till the moment where they said that we could bring her home and let her die with us in the convent. And the sister that was on shift before me brought her the Eucharist, a very small piece. I met one angry nurse. Now she's gone, and I walked in. Sister was choking. And I stop and say, where is our faith? What about all of our life that we've received Jesus? And isn't that their desire? God's bigger than us. Don't limit God with our faith or lack thereof. And so she had to use a tweezer to take that piece of hose down. I didn't have a fix, but the reverence that that nurse had for that small piece of Eucharist, which I then took in a tissue and brought home. Right? So I use that because that will hit us deep and hard, but it's the same thing with food. It can go into their lung. Right? So there's a time when we have to listen to the doctors. And it is extremely distressing when families assisting, because in another example, I'll use a mother. The mother was dying. And again, they wanted everything done, and that term was used, whether or not it was or not, that's what they were saying. And again, insisting on the food and the drink and all of that. And the distress that the doctors and the nurses were in because they knew medically all of the complications of that, because the body can no longer handle it. And what I will say to you is this, because I said it to them during the consult, was the doctors know your mother medically, and the doctors don't want your mom to die. You know your mom as the person that she is, and you don't want her to die. We are not at a point that either of that matters. The disease has already made that decision. She is. And so what do we do in the best interests of mom who is dying? Back to the beginning. What is your concept of death? Is it optional? And I'll take it even further, because we're people of faith. Where does our faith leave us? Would you be the one bringing communion in that room? Or is your faith such that God's already communing with her or him in a way none of us can comprehend? Wow. 2279 Catholic Catechism. Even if death is thought imminent, the ordinary care owed to a sick person cannot be legitimately interrupted. The use of painkillers to alleviate the suffering of the dying, even at the risk of shortening their days, can be morally in conformity with human dignity if death is not willed as either an ends or a means, but only foreseen and tolerated as inevitable. Palliative care is a special form of disinterested charity. As such, it should be encouraged. So what am I saying? What are the authors saying? This is 2278 and 2279 in the Catholic Catechism. So at the end of life, we have the right to die with dignity. So we have the right not to be writhing in pain. And so the doctor says we can do a morphine drip, but it's titrated at a certain quantity. The intent is not to kill the person, And it's not to hasten death, or it's suicide, euthanasia, right? So it's titrated to meet the needs of that pain level and to increase as necessary. In the end, the person's going to die, and they may die sooner than they would have if they weren't given the morphine. But the intent is not to hasten death, and it certainly is not to kill the patient. Okay? So if you're questioning decisions you're making, ask yourself, what is your intent? And listen to the doctors, right? Because you know your loved one as a person. They know them medically. Demand that they give you enough information that you can have informed consent, right? You're making a decision that's informed. You can't do that. Do not allow a doctor to say to you, okay, what would you like to do? And quite honestly, I'm not being sarcastic. That happens. I'm not a doctor. You are. I trust you. I trust your competence as a doctor. Give me the 2 or 3 things that I can choose from that are in the best interest of so-and-so. And I also want to know, if I choose this, what is that going to mean? You have a right to know that, or you cannot make an informed decision. Okay, and that's where I think we get caught up. Those are your rights when you're speaking for someone, and you need a proxy that's willing to use their voice. There's priority of care. That's a value that we have. I'm thinking about theology, the theological reflection. The task of medicine is to care even when it cannot cure. Such caring involves relief from pain and the suffering caused by it. So we can no longer swallow. So we can't take in water, right? Because we could end up drowning in it, right? Or the body will swell with water, and that's so painful. But I can take and moisten the lips, right? I can put something on them so they're not cracking. That's care. So when you're asked to move the person to comfort care, it means we're no longer doing those aggressive medical treatments, but care never ends. It's a community of care. That's one of the values. A Catholic healthcare institution will be a community of respect, love, and support to patients and their families as they face the reality of death. Another value, respect for the dying. The use of life-sustaining technology is judged in the light of the Christian meaning of life, suffering, and death. We believe in redemptive suffering, right? I remember a spiritual director of mine saying to me, he was a Jesuit priest, he said, don't waste the suffering, offer it up. He never forgot it. Boy, did I feel small, right? I was wasting it. And it's one thing to, we're not joying in the suffering, but when it comes, what do you do with it? Use it to save souls, okay? My siblings who no longer practice the faith. Hello, God. I want them in any kind of pew at this point. We'll start anywhere. Okay. God's bigger than us, and we belong to him. One should avoid 2 extremes. 1, insistence on useless and burdensome technology, even when a patient legitimately wishes to forego it. And 2, withdrawal of technology with the intent of causing death. Can't do that. So we're avoiding those 2 extremes. We do not have to use something that we feel is more burden than benefit. I can't be specific because your idea of burden and mine are 2 different things. Okay? And withdrawing technology to cause death. Nope, nope, nope. So employing useless or burdensome means. Okay? 2 extremes. Some person, their leg would be amputated. Here's an example. This was a very sad story. So this patient was actively dying. The body showed and smelled the signs of death. imminent death. And the live-in partner was insistent on having her leg amputated. And palliative got thrown out, pastoral care got thrown out, doctors got allowed in when they had to be, nurses, so they got a hold of me. Great. It was a Friday and I was quite ready to go home, see my mom for the weekend. So I went. And I said, hi, I'm nobody. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a nurse. I don't do blood. I'm not clinical. I'm not pastoral care. I'm just somebody that comes around and sees how everyone's doing. So how you doing? I said, can I come in? No, mind you, he's locked everybody out. So he picks the keys up and he pats the seat. That meant sit. So I went in. I didn't go home that weekend. It took me Friday and Saturday and Sunday, but I listened without judgment. I listened where he was. I heard his story. He was grieving terribly. He wasn't ready to let go, but I had to get him ready quickly because he was saying the leg had to be amputated and it was happening Monday. And that's why the doctors got me. They were in moral distress, as were the nurses. I worked hard. God worked harder. And in the end, I listened so that I could use his words to keep bringing him further and further along. What gift he gave her. So the surgery would have been Monday morning, and she peacefully slipped away to God Monday afternoon. So think about these extreme measures. Is it worth it? Right? For another few hours, for another day or two, a week. You know, it's about them. Yes, we're grieving. So we've got to get in touch with that. You got to get in touch with that so that it doesn't interfere and cause serious suffering in the end. The directives, that whole fifth part, I could go on and on, but I'm going to kind of let you breathe and go home tonight at some point. I have no idea what time it is. Have to go on way over. I don't know where I am.
It's almost 8:30.
Okay, so I'll stop. Yeah, it's ongoing education for yourself. And also, sometimes I hear people, they turn around and they judge the decisions they made after. No, we do the best we can in the moment. And then we kiss it up to God, right? We give it to God. Because in the end, we belong to him. And he sees the intent. He sees the heart. And he's gracing that person all the way along. And if it's you, believe me, all of heaven is there with you. And walking with you. And God will take care of your loved ones that are left behind. So we don't have to worry about that. Do you have any questions? You don't want to be here another few hours, do you? All right, I'll do that one little piece that I'm supposed to say if I can find what I did with my paper. Disclaimer. My comments today are my own. I am not speaking as a representative of or for Holy Spirit Hospital, Penn State Health, or the Diocese of Harrisburg. Thank you. God bless.
Thank you, sister, very much. I think it was very informative. One thing that Father Ken had asked us to make sure everybody knows is if you're having an appointment to have a surgical procedure, call the office ahead of time, and we will have healing services or anointing services so you can receive that sacrament before you go, or call us beforehand. As Father is known to share with us, there's fewer priests that are available. So if you find yourself in the hospital and you need the sacraments, sometimes it's not always available. So make sure you you call and they'll do the best you can and make sure you are giving that information when you're checking in, that you are Catholic and that you have that need. And then also, I think if you are going to the hospital, just make sure you give a call to the office so we know what's going on, because there's a lot of times we find out somebody's had something or somebody's passed and we're like, well, did we know that? And we want to help you and we want to help the family as much as we can from that pastoral standpoint and the support standpoint. So just keep that in mind.
Yeah, so thank you, because I did forget that. It's really, really important because we are on the age of HIPAA. We are not allowed to give information out. Okay. So, even with the sisters, I don't come home and say, so-and-so's in the hospital, right? You deserve your privacy. If you're going to tell a friend in the parish that you're going into the hospital and you don't want Father to know for some reason, you need to tell them, because what happens is we get in a pretty bad situation where we've had a patient come in, like the stay is much shorter. We had a patient come in, nothing was said. Sad to say, a few days later, the patient died. And so that was the first the parish was hearing about how sick the patient was when they were dead, right? And Father wanted to support, so it put him in a really bad situation, right? An awkward situation with the family. So be really careful. And if you are given that confidence, please don't spread it to anyone. So if I'm telling you I'm going in the hospital, I'm saying, please don't share it, please don't, right? Because we have a right to tell people we're going in or not tell them. We have a right to that privacy. I've already told the sisters, if I'm in the hospital, don't come visit me. I'll let you know if and when. And I'm really serious about it, because if I'm getting bad news, I'm not going to be my best self. And I want to be able to process that before 11 other people come walking in my room, right? Because I'm not ready. That's too many people. So, and I also tell the chaplain, stay away. I want to talk to the doc first, right? I got a relationship with God. We're on good terms, right? So, there's no wrong answer. You have a right to your privacy, and you have a right to how you want to handle whatever it is you're handling. I've been in the hospital as a patient when I was much, much younger, and they put a sign on the door because I was a teacher. And I knew there was some people that wanted to see Sister in her hospital gown. Devailed, right? So seriously, what did I do? No visitors allowed, and they protected me. So you have a right to that, but it does put us in a funny situation. The other problem is registration has a really hard time asking the questions, all right? They're asking the insurance questions and all of that, and you want to get to your hospital room or your surgery or whatever. So that question gets skipped. We had a mom call the sister in the corridor and say, Sister, my son is in here, he's a priest. We had on the record that he had no faith denomination at all, he was a priest. So, and even when the priests go around with the so-called Catholic list, I had one the other day, I was at Hampton. So I went there to a Catholic, the wife was Catholic, not him, and I came with Jesus. Sister, I'm not Catholic. I said, oh, they've got you on the list. He said, well, I told him I was Catholic because my wife is. So we check. Sometimes we think you're Catholic and you're not, and sometimes we think you're not and you are. So please, 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 it helps us stay out of trouble, and it's best for you. And like the stage is really short too.
I have a question, I think, for Sally. Could you clarify with surgery, because I know I was going in for a knee replacement. Someone else told me, you should have Father give you the sacrament of anointing. And I was raised, that was when you were on your deathbed. So, I mean, if we would contact Father for every surgery we have, he would never be, there's a lot of us that have a lot of surgeries. So, I mean, what is the protocol?
So, that's a whole, yeah, that's a whole education on this sacrament, because the flip side is, and we don't want this happening either. So I come in for an illness. I don't need to get anointed every day, right? And that's really a problem. My sister-in-law just did this before my nephew died. 5 times the priest was in for the anointing, same illness, once is enough. That's on you, right? If you're not going under anesthesia and it's just, simple surgery and you don't feel like you need it, that's okay. We've gone from one extreme to the other, where extreme unction, right? Right, so once and, right, and now we look at it as a sacrament for the sick, right? So you would decide that, okay? So you don't have to get the sacrament, and please don't triple up, double up on one illness. So even if I have a cancer and I go home and I go back in, you don't have to keep doing this. And that's why I actually asked the bishop if he would please talk to the priests and ask them to talk about this sacrament and have the appointments before, because it's causing us a situation where many times I only have one priest. Or if I have 2, I have them such now that they start at 6 in the morning. One goes from 6 to 2, and the other one starts 6 to 2. The other one starts at 11 and goes to 7. So they can get some sleep because I got them up for 6:10 mass the next day. In an emergency, they will come back, but I don't want them dead, right? So I'm trying to avoid that 24/7 that they are being running back and forth, because truly I'll burn them out and they'll leave. And my priest turnover is really, it's all the time. So I'm trying to keep them to stay longer. And that really is one way to help us. So emergently, yes, they'll come back in the middle of the night. But even for your own priest, they are working so hard, right? And so they do need sleep. That being said, I called my pastor for my dad at 2:15 in the morning. So they will come when it's emergent.
I think one of the things that Father was trying to do was